Then you got to go to the. I have to type in his. Yeah. You have to. I'd have to do 9-1, right?
9-1, 8-6, 6, 5, 6.
Welcome to Ready Access by CenturyLink. Please enter your access code, followed by the pound sign.
I'm thinking if we're going to have a full house, we'd like to start in the stairs.
Did the 8 go on? Oh, it didn't?
That entry is not valid.
Charlie,
Please
where do you
enter
see
your
it
access
popping
code,
up?
followed by the pound sign.
Okay.
1, 1.
Okay.
3, 8. 9, 8.
Pound.
Thank you.
Oh.
Please
See, I was
hold on.
listening for the beep because I couldn't see it come up, and I couldn't hear the beep.
If you are the chairperson, press the star key now. Please enter your chairperson passcode, then press pound.
2, 3, 9.
Pound.
To start your conference, press 1. To change account option, press to start your conference now, press star. Or for additional security, you will now be placed into conference. For a menu of conference commands,
So
press
that's all we have to
star
do.
at any time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, he's kind of tall. Andre, do you want this down a little bit? Lower. I mean, you're tall, but
Yeah, no, I'm going to stand right here.
okay.
So,
You need to see the screen when you for the presentation.
no, I can see it there.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Oh. It's up on this one. Is that you're hooked to this one? Though, right?
No, I'm not hooked to any of them.
Oh,
So
that is it. Yes.
That is it, right? So yeah, I can see it from there. All I need, I guess, is the mouse. Thank you. Let's turn it on. Oh, it is on. Okay.
Do you want a pad? A pad? You think sometimes?
Yeah, let's see if this. Oh, you know what? Oh no, it is there, so it's connected.
Is the light on?
I don't see the light on. Let's turn it off. And turn it on.
Is it the most on?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I usually bring them That's what we've seen. And I don't have the coronavirus yet.
It's my standing joke for now.
Good morning, everyone. Who do we have on the phone? Well, good morning. Thank you for checking in. Does everyone have a handout? Okay. And if you have a writing utensil, that's also important. You could lend one to your neighbor. Well, I'm glad to see your shining faces this morning. I am delighted to welcome back, on behalf of the Professional Development Committee, Mr. Andre Koen. His enthusiasm and energy helped us to look at issues of inclusivity and diversity with new eyes in November, and we're very happy to have him back to do the same today. At Mayo, Andre shares his wisdom as the Office of Diversity and Inclusion Program Director through the development of programs, workshops, and resources that enhance workforce diversity, examine equity, and create inclusion. Andre's unique style of training engages participants in action-based sessions that are free of fault, blame, or guilt. Andre received his Master's in Education and Instructional Design from the University of St. Thomas. The National Human Rights Workers Association awarded the Human Rights Worker of the Year to Andre for his knowledge of the law and programs that empower people to increase justice for all. The son of a Black Panther civil rights activist and preacher, Andre learned early the importance of human connections. He conducts sessions that encourage individuals to acknowledge our commonalities, differences, and build environments where people can bring their best selves to work. As a former K-12 teacher, university professor, and affirmative action officer, Andre uses his experience to help groups move towards organizational goals and provides practical tools that secure that the needs of the patient come first. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome back to Mr. Andre Koen.
That is the best eulogy I've ever heard about myself. I'm like, wow, that guy is really fun. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So I want to say thank you so much for inviting me back. So the biggest compliment is not to be invited, but to be invited back, right? So I appreciate that, and I also take this responsibility very seriously. We are currently in a world that's very polarized, and people are trying to capitalize on our differences as opposed to figuring out ways to bring us together. So I want to do that. I also have to recognize that and I think this is one of my standing things. And I try to do my best with it. I'm human, so sometimes I fall short of my goals. But I'm a cisgendered male, and so I see the world a particular kind of way. I am 6'2". I am educated, so I've gone through higher education and received degrees after my last name. I don't know if I'm lower middle class or upper lower class. I'm not sure where I fall in that. I'm a conservative Christian. Let's see. Cisgender. Yep. And I say all of those things because those are the things that society gives me power with, right? So I have access to resources because I have those characteristics. And if I'm not mindful of those things, then those things can become weapons used against other people. And so, as much as I think about my power and I think about my privilege, I want you to think about yours. And how do you either use it for good or use it for evil? And I would suggest that if you're not thinking about how you're using your power, you might want to start doing that, because we know that the default oftentimes is not good. If we look at how anyone been to St. Paul, driven in St. Paul streets, how are those? Right? Has anyone driven in Minneapolis? How are those streets? Right? They're goofy for different reasons, but St. Paul was not a planned city. It kind of happened along trails that became streets, where Minneapolis was set on a grid. And so if we don't pay attention to things, we can see how organically sometimes things happen, versus when we're thoughtful about things, how we can actually direct them in a way that we want them to go. And so today I'm not here to preach to you, not whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to discover together. And so I want us to discover together. I also want to recognize that we are on Dakota land, right? And so the sacrifices that they made involuntarily to leave this land and what it means to be on this land is extremely important. And if we don't understand the context, then we can be confused about our participation in the world that we live in, right? So we have to keep those things in mind as we work together in today's session. So to that end, I want to start with an activity. I believe we may have done this before, but there will be some nuances that come up differently this time that I still want to explore with you. All right. So on the front page of your handout, there are 5 green circles. What I'd like for you to do is to put one thing that you value in each one of those circles. So one thing that you value in each one of those circles. If you need a pen, remember, closed mouths never get fed. All right. And so for those of you on the line, what I'd like for you to do is to go ahead and draw 5 circles on a piece of paper. And I actually, for those of you on the line, I'll come to you first before I come to the folks in the audience so they can gain from your wisdom. All right? So one thing that you value or that is important to you in each one of those circles. So you have 5 circles. One thing that you value or that is important to you in each one of those circles. It could be a person, niece, nephew, grandchild, significant other. It could be a place like Belize or Bemidji. It could be a concept like justice or freedom. It could be I guess I already said thing, right? So just one thing that you value in each one of those circles. For those of you on the phone, the people in the room are acting like this is the ACTs. You should see them. They're trying to get the right answer, right? And it's only 5, right? So, all right. So if you get at least 4, if you can look up so I can see where we are. Okay. Great. So wherever you are in that process, I'd like for you to stop, and we're going to just move to the next level of the game or the activity. And what I want you to do is I want you to, in the room, I want you to find as many people as possible that have either common or the same things that they've written down. And when you find those individuals, I want you to put your name or sign your initials next to the thing that you have in common or that even that you like, right? So if you see something that you like, sign on that as well. If you have it in common, great, right? Sign on that. You have 90 seconds to do that starting now. And for those of you on the phone, what I'm going to ask you to do is actually have a couple of you kind of say one thing. I think there's about 5 of you. So if you can say one thing that's on your paper, and then we'll see if there's a commonality with people in the room. All right? So for those of you on the phone, I'm going to ask you to say one thing that you wrote down, and then we'll see if there's a commonality in the room. All right? 60 seconds. Thirty seconds. One person. No one quit work. Huh?
No one quit work. At least in this area.
That is funny. So for those of you on the phone, we're going a little bit longer than 30 seconds because people are really engaged in the process. So I'll come back in just
You turn this room loose, they go to town with it.
Yeah, no, they're. The room is also set up in lecture style, so it's kind of hard for you to get around, so give us a little extra time for that. So thank you for your patience.
No, right
Four,
now.
3, 2, 1, and game over. Game over. So the folks on the phone will be able to speak. Is that correct? All right. So so what I'd like is for if someone on the phone could say one thing that they had as one of their 5 values, and if someone in the room has that same one, say here, here. All right, or something similar to that. All right. So what was yours?
I put self-sufficiency.
Self-sufficiency. Here. All right.
Thank you.
I put family.
Yeah.
Yes, I got the right answer.
Who's next? And we say, back to you.
I wrote down nature.
Wonderful, wonderful.
This is Mary. This is Mary. I struggle with whether the profound or personal. So my profound is safe and my personal is the energy basketball game.
So basketball, anyone? Okay, sports. Okay, we got one here. All right. All right, thank you so much for engaging on. Oh, is there one more person?
Yeah, there's one more.
Oh, okay.
You're here. I couldn't see the unfortunately I'm only able to do this, to come in remotely, but I don't know. So this would be profound and it's security. Here.
All right, you got some here's. All right, cool. So obviously, as you looked at, those of you in the rooms particularly, as you were looking at other people's papers, were there things that you saw in other people's papers that you were like, wow, yeah, why didn't I think of that? Or I could have wrote that down. Yeah. What were some of those things that you saw in other people's papers that you were like, I could? Nature. Okay, who's one of those? Travel. Freedom. Faith, music and literature, money, education. Wonderful. Yourself. Okay, so you saw someone that, no, you have to value yourself. I appreciate that. Yay! Health. All right. Cool. So obviously, what's the lesson in this particular activity? What were we going after? Yeah. So looking at commonalities and also recognizing what? Our differences, right? Our differences. Let me pull up the PowerPoint. I got so excited that I didn't do my due diligence. And so when we talk about this idea of cross-cultural agility, and we're really trying to move a little bit away from just competence, and you'll see why in just a second, and really thinking about agility. And what do you think cultural agility suggests? So that I want to learn, that I have a growth mindset. What else? That we're working together. All right. So what we also know is that there'll be a number of. Let me back up. So in my K-12 experience, I had a group of eighth graders, and the first day of school. So I taught for 8 years, and in my first couple of years, I wanted to be the cool teacher, which that didn't work out too well for me, right? Because what I learned is I'd rather be respected than liked, but recognizing that for eighth graders, that's probably the same thing, right? Or they could be synonymous with one another. We spent my first couple of years with my eighth graders. I set out rules for my seventh and eighth graders. And what do you think they spent most of the time doing with my rules? They would go to the limit, they would challenge them, they would try to bend them. They spent more time trying to get around my rules than they would if they followed the rules, right? And so what I recognized was that the rules thing wasn't working for my class. So I moved to a principle-based classroom. And so when I moved to a principle-based classroom, there weren't rules for them to break. Because sometimes they would look at the cost of what they were going to do and make a decision as to whether they're going to do it or not based on the cost, right? So if I'm going to miss an activity, you know what? Punching this girl just might be worth it, right? I'm talking, middle school hormone brains, right? So they would calculate that. But when we went to a principle-based classroom, I didn't have to give rules and I didn't have to give consequences because they came up with their own consequences. Because there were situations that they would be in that I didn't have a rule for, or I couldn't, or there was a nuance that was so sticky that I couldn't have a rule for. So when we think about this idea of cultural agility, we want to really think about how do we operate in some of these situations where we don't really know what to do, right? Or we don't know how to interact, and so we have to be agile. But we'll talk about that in just a bit. So just some basic outcomes, gain skills to learn how to lead in an inclusive manner, understand their own inclusion, your own inclusion journey, understand the business case, have growth in their cultural intelligence, learn ways to drive greater inclusive behaviors, and create a plan of development to grow as an inclusive leader. And so we'll talk about some of those things. We won't develop a plan today, but hopefully you'll start thinking about how to incorporate some of these concepts into your daily life. So one of the things that's extremely important is that why are we doing this? What's the business case for this? That we want to develop people's potential. Not only our employees, but also the patients that we serve, right? And so whatever you think about someone else actually doesn't make any difference into how they live their lives unless you treat them differently, right? And so whatever opinion I have about, three-piece suits on other people, it doesn't change anything about them, right? That's actually my problem. And so I have to be mindful of that. So when we talk about like things like gender pronouns, right? So that's something that in HR we're really trying to encourage. And it's multifaceted, which is an interesting thing, right? So my supervisor's name is Lore Lee. That's his name, Lore Lee. He likes gender pronouns because he does not get called her or ma'am, right? And not that he's opposed to that, but that's just not how he identifies. And so Lore, folks don't ever know what gender that is or how to approach him. And so that's helpful to him. It also opens the door for people because we all know that human behavior is on a spectrum. There aren't any absolutes. And so when we think about even gender, there's a spectrum of gender that we all fall on. And so opening up opportunities to invite conversations around that, I think is better than not, right? And so gender pronouns opens that door for this inclusive environment. So we also know what diversity is. There are many dimensions to diversity. Some of those pieces of diversity we choose, some we're born into, some some we're born into, some we choose, and some we are kind of forced into, right? And so we know that each one of us is an individual. We have some individual characteristics. Again, some we're born into, and then some we elect to be a part of, and then some are societal pieces, right? So society sees and interacts with us in a particular kind of way. So diversity is that commonalities and differences. And I'm sure you've seen this, the difference between diversity and inclusion, that diversity is being invited to the dance, so to speak, and inclusion is being invited to participate in the dance. I would go one step further and say that equity is asking people, what kind of music do you want at the dance? And so that's the next level of what we'll be talking about in later 2020, is how do we start to talk about equity? How do we develop equity? Getting people what they need as opposed to just kind of treating everyone the same. So we just did the values activity, and I want to talk a little bit about the triune brain model, because our brain actually can be unchecked a bias machine, right? A bias machine. So letter C indicates what part of the brain? What's the smallest, oldest? The amygdala, right? Which is also part of the what folks oftentimes call, particularly popular, the reptilian brain, right? So the most primary part of the brain. And then there is what is referred to as the mammalian brain, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is where executive functions happen, right? So what purpose does the amygdala serve? What kind of behaviors come out of the amygdala? Survival. Life, death, me, you, right? How can that start to form the basis of prejudice or bias or discriminatory behaviors. Or can it? Right? Yeah. Are we more than survival? I mean, as a species, as individuals, do we do more than survive? We certainly do. So we have to take control of that, or it will hijack the rest of our behaviors. And I would suggest that a lot of the polarization in our society today is because people keep poking that part of our brain, right? They're after your stuff. They want what you got. They're going to take, and you hear it all over the place. And that just gets, they keep poking at that part of our brain, right? And we're better than that. We're bigger than that. And so we have to be cognizant. We have to be mindful of things. So right on the front page of your handout is a gray circle. And this is the circle of all human knowledge. So for those of you on the phone, just draw an additional circle, and this will be the circle of all human knowledge. So everything that can be known is contained in this circle. What I'd like for you to do is to cut yourself a piece of pie relative to the size of what you know of everything there is to know. All right? So your pen isn't thin enough, but just humor me. Just humor me. All right? So for those of you on the phone, what is contained in that piece of pie for you? What's contained in that piece of pie? Okay, they might not have heard me, but I'll come back to them. All right, so for those of us in the room, what kinds of things are contained in that piece of pie? Of things that you know. Give me 3 things. What are 3 things that you know? You know something, you're here! Yes.
I know how to keep living.
All right, so you know how to keep living. So food and breathing and air, right? So she knows how to keep breathing. What's something else that someone else knows? You know how to boil some water, all right? One more thing that someone knows. You know your name. All right, great. So there are things that we know. So that piece of pie is it pretty big or pretty small? Small is pretty small, right? And so some of us said our pen wasn't large enough to actually make a shape, but I thank you for humoring me. All right. So now what I'd like for you to do is to create a second piece of pie. And this piece of pie is the size of what you know you do not know. What you are aware of that you do not know. And I want to, some people will say, well, that's the rest of the pie. I want to say, let's quantify the second piece because there is a third piece that we'll identify. All right? So what's the second piece of pie? How big is that? And what are some examples of things that you know you don't know? If I can get 3.
One thing that I don't know is I don't know how to drive a car with a stick shift.
All right, so anybody else here not know how to drive a car with a stick shift? Say here so they can hear you. All right, so you're not by yourself. All right? What's something else that people know that they don't know? How to cure any disease or any disease. All right, cool. All right. Anybody else not know how to cure a disease in here? Here. Okay, cool. And the third one.
I don't know how to speak Mandarin.
All right, please raise your hand or say here if you don't know how to speak Mandarin. Here. I don't know how to speak Mandarin, right? Although I do watch a lot of Kung Fu movies, but I'm always confused as to what, So, and Karate Kid 2. Watch the second one with Will Smith's kid. It is amazing. I love it. Jack it on, jack it off. So there are things that we know. There are things that we know we don't know. And what do you think is the third part of that pie? The things that you don't know that you don't know. So write the word blind spot, the 2 words blind spot in that third section, right? So we have the things that we know, we have the things that we know we don't know, and then we have our blind spot. As you look at that, what do you recognize that could be problematic about this diagram?
If you don't know what you don't know, you don't know how big that pie shape should be.
All right, so if you don't know what you don't know how big that pie shape should be. What else could be problematic with this diagram? What's the biggest part? Your blind spot is the biggest part, right? So if we look at all three of those, one could associate that with a concept called a paradigm, right? A paradigm. And what is a paradigm? It's a tricky problem. It is simply the way you see the world. You may want to write that somewhere on your page as well, right? Paradigm, the way you see the world. And so what if this is your paradigm, whose responsibility was it to introduce you to a paradigm? Where did you get it? So you got it from your family, your guardians, the people who raised you. Now, where did they get their paradigm? From their parents, their guardians, the people in the communities that raised them. And where, pray tell, did they get theirs? From their parents, guardians. So is it possible? Anyone ever received a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy? Right? After it's been copied, 5, 6, 7 times, does it look exactly like the original? No, it doesn't. It doesn't look like the original. And what is different about it? It's kind of weathered, it's blurred. It could be misinterpreted, things could be added to it. And so when we think about our own paradigms, do we see the world as it is? I would suggest that we don't. That we see the world as we are. We see the world as we are. But if I'm not cognizant, if I'm not thinking about this, then I will actually think I'm seeing the reality as opposed to recognizing that I'm only seeing a piece of the reality. And that's when people start poking that reptilian brain. Yes?
So I know that basically you know what you know because of what you've been told and you've been stuff too. So if you are watching a certain news channel all the time, that's your exposure from outside. So,
But it also happens the other way, right? So if you refuse to watch that channel, then you never know you never have a balanced approach in your own respect, right? And so one of the things we have to recognize, and I said this to a supervisor. A supervisor called me up and said, I had this problem. And when they told me their problem, I said, you know what your problem is, supervisor? You're too woke. Anybody, folks know what okay, so woke is this idea that you're aware of all social stuff, like you're woke, and so the supervisor overheard some employees talking about their food choices, and the supervisor felt that it could be misinterpreted by other people, and so he wanted to warn them about the dangers of having this conversation, and it backfired. It blew up in his face because he was too woke, right? So one thing to recognize in terms of being cognizant is that there's a difference between individual instances and patterns of behavior. Right? And so what I don't just listen to one news story about a thing. I look for a pattern of news stories that confirm the whole that particular worldview or that outlook across a number of spectrums, because I know the truth is always in the middle. Right? The truth is in the middle. So if I'm not willing to look at what the other side is saying about an object, about a position, then I'm not willing to be cognizant. This takes a lot of effort to be thoughtful, right? It takes a lot of effort to be thoughtful. That's why stereotypes work so great, because I don't have to think about it. I already know that, that person's tall, they must have been a volleyball player. right? Or this person is, whatever, they're good at math. I don't have to think about it. But the problem is that we don't recognize that there's so much in that blind spot that could be hurtful or harmful to us and to others, right? So let's just go to your handout. I want to. So what are people after? We've kind of talked about this before, and I appreciate you indulging me in this. Is that we're all after significance, belonging, and safety, right? Why do kids join gangs? They're looking for one of these three or all three of these things. Why do kids join 4-H? Same thing. What's the difference between the gang kid and the 4-H kid? Possibly opportunities. I would say direction. Are there leadership skills being built in gangs? Yes. Are there interpersonal skills being developed in gangs? Yes. I would just say, what would happen if 4-H adopted a gang? Directed them to build a house instead of building something else, right? Or whatnot. That's my favorite part about going to the state fair, is looking at all the 4-H projects that young people and older people as well. I don't know why older people like beam paintings. Have you ever noticed that they make all these beam sculpture paintings? It's just, I guess it takes a lot of time. And it's what? Crop art. Yes, crop art. I'm not against crop art. I support it, She can't. You didn't see her face when she said it, she's a crop artist. That's why. All right. So that was my blind spot, right? So we're all after very similar things, but how we want to get those things is very different. And so to be cognizant means that I recognize that we're trying to get similar things, but we may want to get them differently, right? And so my job is to try to figure that out. Next is, and so we have to, cognitive behavior therapy. Is there anyone who's familiar with cognitive behavior therapy, right? So it's a version of talk therapy or psychotherapy where people actually start to control or think about how they can manage their own behaviors, right? And so with that, what I'd like to do is do just a cognitive behavior activity really quick. And so what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to draw a bicycle. Many of us have seen a bicycle. We've ridden a bicycle. We've been around bicycles. So I'd like for you to draw a bicycle. Draw a bicycle. All right. Stop wherever you are in your picture of a bicycle and share that with your neighbor.
Oh yes, that would be awesome. Old swim style.
All right. So I am a new manufacturer in town, and I am going to take and I want to make millions of dollars, right? We want to market your bicycle across the globe. How would you suggest that I pick your diagram to do that, right? So most people said no. So what did you notice about your bicycle as you shared it with others, or you saw other people's bicycles? What did you start to notice? So yours in particular is missing a seat. All right. They were different sizes and different styles. Okay. So some had two wheels. Maybe some didn't have any wheel. I'm not sure. Yeah. But you are a writer and not an illustrator. So for many of us, it should be very clear that we oftentimes operate with this illusion of knowledge. Like we think we know how things work when we actually really don't, right? And so that's part of this cognitive process, being cognitive, being mindful that there asking questions. Is this really how this is, or could there be another explanation for what I'm seeing, what I'm understanding, right? And that's going to lead us to this cultural agility, this cultural competence. So at the bottom of that page is a diagram for mutually respectful workplaces. And so there are red arrows and there are blue arrows. There's also a picture of a duck, and I'll paint the picture for the people on the line. There's a small ledge, and on top of the ledge are 6 or 7 black ducks, and on the ground, not able to reach the ledge, is one little yellow duck. And so there are 5 or 6 black ducks on the ledge, and this little yellow duck is down on the ground and can't get up the ledge. If this duck, given this configuration, experiences this challenge day in and day out, what do you think will happen to the yellow duck's discretionary effort? He'll stop trying, right? He'll give up. Go ahead. I feel you. So let's say this happens for a week. How much intestinal fortitude would it take to keep trying? A lot or a little? Okay.
What's up there that makes me want to get there, or the duck is there? You know what I'm saying?
Yep. No, I get you.
You want that enough.
So how much effort would it take? Let's say, so I started with a week. If we thought about a month, if we thought about a year, and I'm facing this, how much intestinal fortitude does it take to keep trying? A lot. And people do it. People do it. But should we have to make people work that hard? Right? So this picture about the duck is not about the ducks. It's about us, right? So what do we see in this picture? What do we see happening there? What we do know is that microaggressions add to making things more difficult. You don't see this on the phone, but it's the under the picture says if the yellow duck experiences these red arrows, and the red arrows are things like discrimination, unconscious bias, incivility, microaggressions, harassment. If this duck experiences those things, what will his discretionary effort be? And I would suggest that it would probably be low, even if he had the intestinal fortitude to continue and press on, because people do, right? I never will count out anyone. And victors oftentimes pull up too soon before the end of the race, and so that gives someone else an opportunity who has more heart to advance, right? So there's that. On page 3, what I learned. So these are some. So I know I'm running into some generational differences, and so I want to acknowledge that and recognize that. But these are more commonly known as Brazil nuts. They're Brazil nuts. And actually, they're not a nut, they're a seed. They come in a pod. So these are actually seeds in a pod. But I have heard that they have another name that they've been called, right? And they've been called the N-word toes. And you on the phone, you can just imagine it's a derogatory term for people, right? So the N-word toes. And so when has anyone heard that used or seen? Okay, all right. So I'm not okay. So am I telling the truth about that? Right? Okay, cool. So if what do people suggest about the folks who use that term, particularly back in the day? What would they say about those folks? Okay, so will we say that now, or will we say that back for them back then? So it's very common back then, right? It's very common. It wasn't common for my family, but it was certainly common for other people to use that. But what would we say today? that is possibly racist or that it's ignorant, right? What happened? What's the difference between then and now? Our values changed around that word. The societal context is different and has changed, right? And so, if our Uncle Joe or Grandma they get excited when they see that particular thing, and they go to say, "Hey, there's my favorite treat." Those. What do we say to Grandma or Uncle Joe about saying that in public? Don't do it.
I would say it depends. I have been in situations where things like that have happened, and family members have just said, "Oh, well, it's just grandma being grandma. We're gonna not embarrass her or put her in a position where she can feel disrespected," and people just walk away.
Yeah. I'm sure on many things. I don't like ruining Thanksgiving dinners, so I end up. My turkey is tainted with the blood of my lip being bitten, So no, I certainly understand that, right? But we have to look at the context and see what is it worth to us? What is it? What's the cost of doing those things? But we also have to look at the patterns of our behavior because that establishes our character, right? What's the pattern of our behavior? So, I got so happy I forgot where I was. All right. So what I'd like to do in these last 15 minutes is just kind of walk us through the rest of this handout. And so one of the things that we have to also recognize is sometimes we operate with this kind of unconscious bias or this affinity bias. That I like things that are most like me, which is all spurred from what? The amygdala, right? Our reptilian brain. All right. I know folks have to go. You're fine. Rich, have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. See you next year. But so as we look at these shapes, A and B, which one appeals to you more? A or B? All right. And when I do this, most often people say A. Right? People say A. Why? Why A? Because they're symmetrical, right? There's a pattern. They're facing each other, right? Which one of these is the right shape? Both, neither, doesn't matter. All right. So I'm shooting fish in a barrel. I have I don't know why you would shoot fish in a barrel, but that's what they say, right? I'm playing to my audience, right? So you obviously get the differences here, right? So what this affinity bias or this fit bias says is that there are ways that I can look at the same information, but because one is organized in a way that appeals to me, I say that is the more desirable piece of information. And so what I'd encourage you to think about in terms of this cultural agility is looking at culture, looking at what people are bringing, and recognizing that it may not come the way you think it should come. It may not be formed in the way that you think it should be formed. Right? And so that allows us to get past this double standard bias, right? So men, women, male, female. When we think about leadership, how we talk about male leaders, or the words that we use to describe male leaders, it oftentimes does not translate the same way when we apply those words to female leaders, right? So people may refer to a male leader as the boss, but then the female leader exhibiting those same strategies gets called something else, right? That her strong leadership abilities gets translated into something different that's not as glorious, right? But we have to be critical in our thinking about that, all right? And there's a self-assessment at the bottom of page 3 that I'd like for you to do on your own. And basically, and I think we've done this before, but you can measure yourself again on how you, what you've learned about yourself, given the groups that have given you information. So the groups on the left side have tried to give you information about the groups across the top. There are other groups that I could add to that, but the page can only support so many things. But I think you can get the principle. And so if your parents and family taught you positive things, you put a plus. If they taught you negative things, you put a minus. If it was never anything that you talked about, you put a 0. You can have pluses and minuses in the same area, but the size of the plus and the size of the minus will dictate how much you learn. So a big plus means lots of positive, and a little bit of negative is a small minus. Right? So that's a self-assessment you can do. And so when you finish your self-assessment and you look at your zeros or you look at your minuses, then you can make a decision about what you want to do with that. Right? What do I want to do with that? Are there areas that I need to get out of my blind spot and actually bring into my awareness? And then on the back, page 4, is a simple analogy of cultural agility, cultural competence and agility, right? So I know many of us are not mechanically inclined, and some of us are, but all of us know, what do you not do with this electrical outlet and these screwdrivers? Right? Yeah, you don't put them in the hole, any of these holes, right? But which of these, out of A and B, which is appropriate for using to fix this electrical outlet? Is it A or is it B? It is A, right? So B is a Phillips, which is an X head. And so that's cultural knowledge. That I know things about a particular culture. Here is the culture. So what do I have to recognize? I have to recognize, what tool do I use given this particular situation, right? And so when we think about, well, how do I interact with a trans patient? Which tool do I use? So if I have knowledge about that, I have a leg up. So at least I have some knowledge. But then how do I get this agility if I don't know what to do? I ask, right? And I can either ask the patient. I would prefer that you ask before you encounter a patient, so that you show yourself to be someone who's willing to learn, to change, and to grow. And so I really like this analogy that we can have the knowledge, but if I don't know how to use that when I encounter a culture, then I could actually do myself a disservice. And then lastly, is a progression to belonging. So diversity in acquiring, either acquired or inherited, those are the circles that we saw earlier. In an organization that embraces those things, creates the foundation of psychological safety. That psychological safety creates an environment of inclusion, and ultimately it leads to people feeling like they belong. And what happens when we feel like we belong in spaces? Joy. Survival. We thrive. Right? Our discretionary effort goes out the roof, right? Each of us can think of a time when we've had excellent customer service, and mostly that happened because, or we felt that it was excellent customer service because they made us feel like we belonged there, right? They treated us with dignity and honored us, and our patients deserve no less. You know who deserves no less? Us, right? So when we treat each other with dignity and honor, we get the best out of each other. And if I don't understand how to interact, the best thing for me to do is to ask people who I know and trust. And always remember that the truth is in the middle. On the bottom are some exercises that you can, that I'll just share with you, that you can use to kind of expand the conversation. You can encourage other people to have conversations with you to expand your own cognizance, your own ability to be critical about your thought. So at letter A, there are two images. One is of a bird with something in its mouth, and it is also an island with two trees. It is also an island with two trees. So if you look at it right side up, and then you turn it upside down or upside right, you will see an island with two trees. At letter B, there is what? It is a portrait, so it's a face, and it is also the word liar. Was it there before you saw it? It's always been there, right? And so when we think about being cognizant, those are the kinds of things. In letter C, how many triangles are there at letter C? How many triangles are there at letter C? Somebody said 5, 8. Please define a triangle. 3 sides, 3 corners. Is it opened or closed? Closed. How many triangles are at letter C? There are no triangles at letter C. Right? The other 1 and 2 at the bottom really are things for you to read. One is count the number of F's. What we typically miss when we do that particular exercise are the ofs, because they don't make the F sound, they make the V sound. Number 2 you can do on your own. There are lots of puzzles out there similar to that. And then number 3 is what actually can give us real concrete information. There are things that look like hats and arrows and so forth, but there actually is a word there, and the word is fly. Capital F, capital L, capital Y. If you turn your page sideways and draw a line over those shapes, and under those shapes, you'll see white letters on a black background that say fly. So why did you do all this stuff, Andre? It's not just for gimmicks and games, but it is to have us think differently about the world that we're